Espero que estéis muy bien por ahí, que hayáis pasado una buena semana y hoy tenemos una entrevista muy especial. Sabéis que aquí, con ayuda de la gente de Asturscore, os estamos trayendo entrevistas con algunos creadores de bandas sonoras. Hemos tenido a Tony Memir, hemos tenido también a Iván Palomares, nominado al Goya, y hoy tenemos a Edwin Wendler. Edwin Wendler, de verdad, yo sé que no os gustan mucho los vídeos largos, pero mirad esta entrevista porque es súper interesante. Estamos hablando de un tipo que trabaja en Los Ángeles, pero no es de allí, ahora nos contará un poco su historia. Hace música para cine, hace música para otros compositores, lo que se llama música adicional, y esto es algo que a muchos de vosotros, que sé que os gusta la música, porque bueno, cuando os apuntáis, a veces cuando me llegan los correos miro a ver quién se apunta y os veo ahí con vuestra guitarra, vuestro piano, vuestro micrófono y tal, entonces estoy bastante contento de que dentro de que esto no es un canal muy grande, pero sí que veo que mucha de la gente que se está apuntando son músicos, y eso la verdad que me gusta, ¿no? Músicos o gente interesada en la música. Entonces creo que os va a interesar porque es una de las vías profesionales que quizá podéis tener. Esto ya lo hemos hablado con otros profesionales, ¿no? Digamos, estar escribiendo música para otros compositores. Y bueno, él escribe música para otros compositores, nos va a contar cómo es su sistema de trabajo. También hace música para videojuegos, que sé que a muchos de vosotros os gusta. Además, vamos a echar un vistazo a un par de tracks. Él ha abierto su sesión de Cubase y lo ha compartido con nosotros. La verdad que es, ya os digo, un tío súper majo, muy interesante la charla. Y bueno, aquí en la descripción os voy a dejar el enlace a su página web para que sepáis un poquito más de él. Os voy a dejar, por supuesto, el enlace para la web de Asturscore, sin los cuales todo esto no sería posible. Os voy a dejar también los enlaces para los juegos de los cuales Edwin y yo vamos a hablar, que son juegos para los que él ha hecho música o música adicional. Y como es habitual, pues os voy a dejar también los enlaces para mis cursos, tanto el de armonía como el de voicings, ¿vale? Así que, sin más preámbulo, vamos con la entrevista. Well, today we have here Edwin Wendler, and he will introduce himself because he's a great composer and it's very interesting. You are doing a lot of things. You are making music for not just for the movies, but you are helping other composers. You are making additional music. That this is something really, really interesting for the viewers of Asturscore and for the viewers of my channel, because some of them, they are young composers, very interested, and I know they are just watching your screen now and they are like, oh my god, that will be interesting for sure. Then Edwin, how do you start in music? Because as far as I know, your family was already in the music. How it was?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Tony. I want to thank Ruben Asturscore for making this interview possible. It's always a big pleasure to be talking and to be, geeking out about film music and talking about what makes us all tick and the passion that we have for this and the different ways that we come to the subject of film music or media music in general. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for your work.
You're welcome.
Now, about myself, I grew up in Vienna, Austria. My background is in classical music. Both my parents worked in classical music. My mom was a professional singer, although she stopped singing after a while. She figured that it would be good at least for one member of the family to have a so-called straight job, a 9-to-5 kind of office job.
Eternal problem. That's eternal yes. problem.
So she did that, but my dad continued to work at the Vienna State Opera, which, as some of your viewers may know, is a very, very prolific opera house. They do a different opera every night, which I think makes them unique in the world. And so there were rehearsals going on all the time. Sometimes I wouldn't see my dad a lot because he was in rehearsals all the time. And so he would not only sing, but he would also be an assistant director at the State Opera. And since his background was in journalism, he also wrote some of the programs, like you go in, you buy a opera program and you read the notes, and they were written by my dad, and that was exciting too. So in some of the productions, it's like he would sing a small part on stage, and he also wrote the notes for the program, and maybe also assistant directed. So it was exciting, and I was a member of the Vienna Choir Boys, singing actively in the choir and touring for 4 years. And also part of the Vienna Choir Boys' job is to perform at both opera houses there, the Vienna State Opera and the Volksopera. Mm-hmm. And so oddly enough, I was in the Vienna Choir Boys while my dad was working in the State Opera, but we never shared the same stage. Like, it was, since there were so many productions, it just never happened that we worked on the same thing. I remember visiting him oftentimes, and then sometimes when I would sing, he would be just backstage, seeing me, or we would run into each other in the cafeteria in the opera house.
It sounds like a movie. It sounds like a movie, like a father and a son. They are in the same place, but they can see each other.
In a world of classical music.
Yes.
Yeah. But it was exciting, and the Vienna Choir Boys, I usually tell people it's in terms of the musical education, the classical music education, the repertoire that you sing. It was just a great experience, a great learning experience. You get the privilege of working with all kinds of, world-renowned singers and conductors and musicians of all kinds, and that's an exciting aspect of it. For me personally, there was also a difficult aspect, and that is that it's a full boarding school. I enjoyed being at home with my parents and my friends, and so you get sort of ripped out of that environment and put into a completely different environment, and that was a bit difficult for me. And not only in the beginning to adjust, but throughout the whole 4 years I spent there. But that's just me, I guess. There are other people who go there and who really blossom, who enjoy the experience, and who actually get a bit of a retirement shock when they leave. I ended up not having that. I was quite happy to leave, fortunately or unfortunately. And of course you have to leave when your voice changes. So, but again, you get pulled out of another environment and you get sent back home. And things are different, and it's difficult for some people to adjust after that. For me, fortunately, I found right back in, and my passion for film music started while I was, even actually before the Vienna Choir Boys. Like I remember one of my early experiences was listening to things like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and the Jungle Book and the Sherman Brothers, and it was like a magical musical experience. And Disney movies, of course. And then of course the Star Wars and the fantasy movies.
John Williams is a master for all the musicians, I believe. Yeah.
Yes. So so that was my early film music experience, and like I have glimpses of memories of watching the movie Krull with my parents in a huge theater in Vienna.
Oh,
and then
Krull.
Walking out.
But this is a very weird reference. I like that movie. I talked to all my friends about this movie. It was, if I don't remember bad, Horner was the composer.
James Horner, yes.
Yes, and when I start to explain about this star that you can control with the mind and everything, people is looking at me like, okay, Tony, I will see it maybe one day. They are like, but it's a good movie and I like it. It's fantasy, and I was very 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 young when I see it, and that's then you see I can do music. You were thinking that I can do music for that, or it was like.
No, not really. At the time, I was 10 or 11 years old, I guess, and when I first saw the movie. But I do remember walking out of the movie theater and singing the main theme with my mom. Because it's so memorable, and it was a really magical experience. It really formed my appreciation for film music in general. And then, of course, I noticed the name James Horner, and then my mom worked at the United Nations, and they had a video rental store there, where she would rent, she would give me a printed list, and I would check which movies I wanted her to rent for me. And they were all movies in their English original language. That's how I organically learned English, just by absorbing all these movies. And so one of those movies was Battle Beyond the Stars. Yeah. And I listened to the opening of it, and kind of sounds like Krull-ish, and then of course it says James Horner. I'm like, yeah.
Boom.
So I made the early connections, oh, this guy has worked on other things, and so I kept seeking out that kind of work. And of course, film music at the time was, some of it was readily available. Other things I just could never figure out why they were never released. Some big movies and Back to the Future. I'm like, it's nice to have a couple of orchestral cues on the song album, but it would be nice to have a whole score, and it was never released until Entrada finally did it many years later. But so I was I knew I was a fan, but I didn't know I was able to be actually working in film music. It was always sort of a pipe dream, and my mom, as much as I love her, she was sort of a dampening influence on my career, because early on she just told me that, as a composer, you have to be a fantastic instrumentalist. You have to play the piano super well, and I couldn't.
Mhm.
And so, it's like, oh, I can never be a composer. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to write something. And at the time, I did an album that I called Music Nobody Wants to Hear, or Music Nobody Wants to Listen to, because, I got like negative feedback from my parents. Although my dad was much more supportive. He's no longer with us, but he's always been sort of my parents have always been sort of a yin and yang sort of
Yeah.
influence on me, where my dad was usually encouraging. He sometimes didn't understand what I was trying to do with my music. It was just not his kind of music.
Yeah.
His world was very much rooted in classical music, opera and operetta. And I was listening to, crazy film music. And I also remember, like, at one point I was in my room. I must have been like 15, 16 years old. And I'm listening to some horror music. I forgot what it was, I don't know, Hellraiser or something.
Whoa.
And my mom walks by the room and she's like, this music is so depressing. I don't know how you can listen to that kind of thing. But I just enjoyed all of it, the light and the dark, the complex and the simple. Film music, as you know, is such a huge range of material, all kinds of styles. And I was just fascinated by the complexity of it and the interaction with images. And also I loved storytelling. I in the Vienna Choir Boys, I remember talking about Krull. I was the kid who told the plot of Krull to other kids.
Yes, it must be, yes.
it must have been ridiculous, and I'm sure I got it all wrong.
They look at you like, uh-oh, here we go. I see you study something. This is something that I like a lot, because I always tell to the people, listen, if you are really interested on film music, you should learn about making films, how the story goes, and for me, the storytelling is really important. And I don't know if you share this, but my feeling, and I don't want to sound like all times are better, stuff like this, but I can feel something. I don't know if it is the editing or maybe is the curve, the arcs. Sometimes I see new movies that are like a lot of scenes one after another, but I don't feel the flow of the story, and some movies, they sound amazing. It's a sound like when you're in the theater, it's like, oh my god, how the sound design, everything, but you don't have a theme that, okay, you have a theme, but it doesn't develop, it doesn't grow, it doesn't give you, I don't know, it's difficult to attach to it. Then I always say, if you follow the structure of the movie, if you follow the structure of the story, you will do better music. And for me, it's important when I see composers that are reading books about the script and about storytelling and about this. For me, this is positive. And I see you were studying this.
Well, thank you. And it's there's a lot to talk. You've covered a lot of different topics there. No. One of them is like the storytelling and how important it is. Like I'm very grateful, because when I first came here to LA, I not only studied film scoring, I did the film scoring certificate program at UCLA Extension. I also did their screenwriting program.
Great.
And actually the way I started in Vienna, Austria, because the type of music that I wanted to write was not in demand anywhere in Austria. If you look at the Austrian entertainment industry and filmmaking in particular, it tends to be more drama driven or more experimental driven, and a lot of projects are financed or co-financed by the Austrian government, and their objective is to invest in non-commercial projects, and I'm sure some of that has changed, and of course there's more, it's become a bit more commercialized, but at the time I was there was nothing that I could write the kind of music for that I wanted to write, so I decided to just do some short films on my own, and I was very fortunate to connect with a group of amateur filmmakers.
Great.
They call themselves Magellan Film. And so it's a very simple principle. You become a member, you pay a membership fee annually, and then all that money gets pooled. And then when you have a project that you want to do, it can be anything. It can be a wedding video, it can be something commercial, it can be something fantastic, you present it to a board, which is like, an elected group of representatives.
Yeah.
And then they usually, they approved everything because they were just happy that people were engaging in this community and doing movies and short films. So I did a couple of short films with them, and I wrote the music for them. That's how I got started. And that's what got me interested in storytelling on that kind of level, with screenwriting and story structure on a granular level. So when I came here, I was really interested in studying that. And the classes I took were all super, super useful, not only from a storytelling perspective, but also just knowing what the other side of filmmaking is about, because as a composer, as you enter the project usually at the very end. Yeah. Most of the work is already done. There's still some editing to do and some, image fixes and visual effects maybe, and sound effects. Mm-hmm. But the creative people, the directors, the producers, they've gone through this journey that's, maybe a year or two or more. So it was good to learn more about that, about development of a screenplay, what they call development hell, and how frustrating that can be. So, once a director arrives in your studio, they are marked by sometimes horrible experiences and very taxing experiences. And it was good to learn more about that side of it, to be more empathetic and to know more about where they're coming from. And it also made me understand that as a composer, you need to be there at the very end, when they're struggling to meet their deadline, and you need to make sure that you are a calming presence, and you're there as a problem solver, and you are their solution to their music problems. Yeah. That's a very important thing, because they have a billion other things to worry about. So if you are there and you get them in a confident place that you can take care of the music, that's a big step. That's a big, it's a building of trust. And so I've always believed that it is my role to provide that to filmmakers once they're at that stage in post-production.
Yes, you're totally right. And in fact, I always I always talk with other composers and people and say, if you have more time. I mean, for example, with some directors you can do it. Hans Zimmer works with Nolan at the very beginning, and it allows you to make different things, to think about a little. It's like, for example, if someone tells you, okay, in next year you will do Lord of the Rings, but you have the book, like Howard Shore had. Then you can, okay, I will start to think about, no matter that you don't see the images yet, but you can start to think, okay, this will be that, this will be that. In fact, it was the Howard Shore choosing was a little bit strange for me, because he's a master of texture. I like The Fly. I see you like horror movies, because and I will talk with you now about how you manage it. But for me, it's a master of ambient, of mood, of these textures, and it's not a leitmotif composer, but he did a great job. But I believe it's not a job that you can do with the habitual schedule you have in movies, that, as you say, you arrive the last one, and you should solve everything, and that's people is already, the nerves are already broken, But what do you think, if you have more time for do things, do you believe you will do better, or just, it's a comic artist, his name is John Byrne, is one classical comic artist. And he says he was making 3 pages per day. And in one interview, they say, oh, listen, and if you make less, you don't believe it will increase the quality? And he said, well, if I make less, I finish, and that's it. I have the day for me. It's not. But I don't know if music, if you have this feeling, of, oh, that project is amazing, and I do my best in this time, but if I had more time, it will be. Do you have this feeling sometimes?
Well, my feeling is that if I'm not happy with it, I'm not going to submit it. So, I do realize that sometimes schedules can be really crazy, and the more composers you work with, the more you hear every composer saying the exact same thing, that the schedules are insane. And so that's a given, that would be like, talking about, the sun rising in the east. It's just, it comes with with the business, taking that into consideration and doing your best to manage your time as best as possible and staying organized. I do believe that, as I said, if I'm not happy with a piece, I'm not going to send it to the client. And this has nothing to do with time. If I had a very short amount of time or a lot of time, I operate the same way. I may get less sleep in the case of less time, but the work itself, I think, would be pretty much the same. Now, of course, there are projects that you may start to get involved with very early on, and then they change. There's changes of direction, maybe reshoots, or things are being moved around, scenes are being tossed out. Or even like the overall direction of a score might change completely. There are some scores that might start with an orchestral approach, and then you end up having more something of a hybrid or even completely electronic. And usually that happens in the early stages where you just focus on a couple of scenes or a couple of themes. But it can also happen that you may have scored the entire movie and then it doesn't work anymore, or a new producer comes on and they're like, we need to go in a different direction. And then in order to not get fired, you really have to be flexible and open to new ideas.
Yeah, that happens, yes.
So all of that can happen. So time is a factor, of course. But as I said, just from a creative or ethical standpoint, I want my music to be as best as it can be, no matter what the time constraints are. And I work hard at that. And I'm sure a lot of composers do.
Yes, it's a lot of legends and stories in LA about some composers making, you see, James Newton Howard makes this score on just 2 weeks. 2 weeks, it's crazy. And but that happened. But I believe it's good. And all the composers I'm making interviews here in Asturscore, they always say exactly the same we are talking now. I mean, I always ask for 2 reasons. One is maybe someone will tell me something different one day. And the second and more important for me is if someone is watching this and really wants to be a composer for film, he will know that there will be some nights that, okay, I can't sleep today because if I sleep, I don't write. Then coffee, and that's it. And maybe, okay, and you make, let's talk about additional music, because for me, it's really important, and mainly for one reason. If you are you don't have problems fitting your style, because you just should create the style for the movie and go on because it's you. But now, if other composer calls you and tell you, listen, I have these scenes, these are the themes, these are the textures, and this is the orchestration, blah, blah, blah. Do the score of these scenes because I can't, or I don't have time, or I don't know how exactly works, but now you will tell. But you should write your best, but you can't be like something that, music is different. What happens here? It should be smooth. I mean, even no transition. It should be exactly the same. So, sound like other, for me, should have. It requires a deep analysis, analytic thinking about, okay, which kind of things you do, which is the kind of harmony you use, which is your kind of devices, the resources, everything is. And I feel it's rich for you. I mean, you become, I don't know the word in English, when you grow, your resources grow because you are forcing yourself to think outside the box and outside your own personality. And how do you arrive to this kind of work? Because for me, it sounds very interesting, really.
Well, as you may have seen in my biography, I've worked with 3 composers doing additional music and arranging, and they are Paul Haslinger, Stephen Trask, and John Ottman. And they're very different people with very different personalities, and I've enjoyed working with each one of them. And, I can only speak for myself.
Yeah.
But in those 3 cases with those 3 composers, there was never any overt pressure that was put on me by any of these guys to sound exactly like they do. What composers usually do, as you know, and I'm sure you've heard from many other composers, is at the beginning of a project, you narrow down the musical vocabulary, you try to figure out what the sound world is. Mm-hmm. And I'll take John Ottman as an example. You know, when he starts work on a project, he will figure that out. There will be principal themes away from picture. You know, I know that Hans Zimmer does what he calls suites. You know, they can be like a 15-minute suite of material that lives in the sound world of that particular project. And with John Ottman, what we have in the beginning is some sort of theme or thematic material. It can be multiple themes. We also have sounds. They can be very specific sounds that he has picked. And in that case, he usually coordinates with me and we make sure we're on the same page. Like I have the same plugins that he uses, and even down to minute details, like which delay time to use and in which filter effect to use and which patch.
The technical side, yes.
It can get very technical, but it's important, you know, so as you said, so that, you know, if I work on something, it doesn't sound like it comes from somewhere else. It needs to all live in that same sound world. And it goes back to your previous point that you were making about the consistency, where, you know, for instance, I'm thinking about the movie Nonstop, where John worked quite extensively on the first 2 reels, I think, to establish that sound and that, you know, psychological uneasiness in the music that was very important throughout the whole movie. And once that was established, I had that material to work with and to expand on and to apply to certain situations and certain scenes, and to just mold it to whatever it needed to be, always in close contact with John. He always gave me feedback. He was just a wonderful guidance through that project, you know, making suggestions, you know, making corrections whenever necessary. And then also he would give me the feedback. So there would be a presentation with director and producers or whoever was in charge. And then, you know, going through the John Ottman filter, because sometimes clients can speak in terms that are not easily understandable to musicians. Yeah. But, you know, John just has the experience and especially with the clients, those specific clients. So, you know, when they say something that might sound crazy, John knows exactly what they mean. And then he's able to let others know how to make that happen in terms of an update to a piece. So that's usually the process that I go through. In other cases, you know, there may not be a lot of time, and it's just, okay, here's picture, here's a couple of reference material, go, and we need a first version this evening. Whoa. You know, so it can be different situations, and you just do the best you can under the circumstances. Of course, you try to learn as much as you can about the composer, but as I said, there was never any pressure, you know, like John Ottman never told me, hey, you need to make this piece of music sound more like me, or you know, it has to sound more like my score to, I don't know, whatever previous movie he may have worked on, Usual Suspect. In fact, there was one case in Nonstop where I did something and John told me, you know, that kind of sounds too much like Usual Suspects. You know, I'm way past that point in my career. And I'm like, I didn't even try to make it sound like Usual Suspects, because I even though I had heard the score before, I wasn't super familiar with it. I mean, I own the CD. I remember listening to it many, many years ago, but I didn't use it as a point of reference while I was working. Yet I unintentionally arrived at something that to John sounded Usual Suspect-ish, and he didn't like that too much. So of course I changed it.
Yeah, but that's a signal. That's a signal that you got it. I mean, you are in the wave. You know the way he thinks. For me, when you study someone, and that's something I say a lot on my channel, because I feel like if you repeat certain ideas, maybe one day someone will, okay, I will try this. When you are analyzing the work of someone, don't look at what he is doing, but try to figure out why he is doing that. I mean, when you hear, I know you're, same as all of us, you are a John Williams fan. Then when you hear Raiders, as example, and a lot of people, if you have 10 minutes, write something that is like John Williams style, and they will put a lot of runs with woodwinds and stuff, you know. But the thing is, Okay, it's not about the seventh chords on the brass section. It's not just about the runs on the boots, but how he uses. Because I was when I was listening to Raiders in the second time you hear the theme, it makes kind. I was thinking it was a swell with the brass, but it was not a swell. It was a run with the woodwinds that make it feel like a swell. And I was when I have the score in my hands, I was looking and what the then now how he uses this. Then if you don't think why the composers you like do the things they do, I feel it's very difficult to learn anything. I mean, you just will scratch the surface. It's like Hans Zimmer. Okay, yes, put big brass here and 200 people play. No. Listen, this guy is making a different universe of sound for each project. That's the thing you should get from him. Not just the brass here and blah 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 blah. But it's difficult, and I feel working as you work, having the composer at your side, and can you can talk with him, you can understand, you are watching in the spotting session with him, and you are hearing his thoughts. Then it's very easy. It's more easy to can understand the decision making process, and then you can use your own, but you have other opinion, but inside your head. That's wonderful. I really like the additional music. For me is something that maybe all the aspiring composers should make.
I know. It's again, there's a lot of ground you've covered with the thing you mentioned about John Williams sounding like John Williams, and you said something super smart, which is look at the motivation, the reason why Williams is doing what he's doing, and it all comes, of course, from the movie, or whatever dramatic intent is behind the music, whatever the music needs to do for the picture, that's what he's providing, and he's looking for the best way to do that, and it comes out as John Williams just because he is John Williams. And I remember Zimmer said this in an interview because he was asked specifically about what they call the horn of doom, and the overused sound, and it's used everywhere and in a bazillion movie trailers, and now less, fortunately. But at the time, I remember reading an interview and how frustrated he was, and he said, it's a frustrating thing for him that something he has worked on is now everywhere, because then he has to work against that. And also, it's not good for everybody else. We should all find our own solutions to a specific issue. And I guess that sort of dovetails with the issue of temp music, where, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of composers have told you, the issue of temp love, where there's temporary music and they fall in love with it, and then the composer gets forced to write something that's exactly like it. I think there are ways around it, and I think for composers struggling with that, I would recommend listening to interviews with, for instance, Danny Elfman or Thomas Newman. These are composers that we think have these very distinct voices, but they struggle with temp scores too sometimes. And especially like Thomas Newman, if he works in a huge movie, of course, there's temp all over the place. And it is a journey, and hopefully this is where time comes into play again, where hopefully there's enough time on a project where you can convince the client in small baby steps, and very politely and very carefully sort of massaging them into a mindset where they're more open to receiving original ideas or things that sound more like they are custom made for this particular special movie or project or whatever it is, as opposed to just sounding like what some other composer and filmmaker thought would work great with some other movie. So it's a very careful dance, because I do understand the temp love, especially if the movie gets shown to a test audience and the audience loves it. Then it's very easy to fall back on that, to say, especially if there's a sequence, or like everybody loved this sequence, you need to write something that's exactly like it. And sometimes you may have no choice but to say, okay, I'll do it. But it's always worth the time and effort to, I think, do something more original, something that's more custom made or tailor made or more special, or whatever that word is. And of course, everybody has to be comfortable with that decision. Which also ties in with another thing, which is very important to know for a young composer starting out. You have to be able to find different approaches for the same thing, because there is no correct approach. You may have, like, for instance, if you are in a spotting session with a director, you're watching a scene and you have a gut reaction. You feel very strongly about it. Mm-hmm. You write a piece of music, you present it to the director hates it. You have to be open to reinventing the wheel for yourself, to find a completely different approach, or even go more along the lines of the temp or go against the temp. In some cases, and if you're a younger composer starting out, you will find out that every project has problem areas. It's usually one or two problem areas where people feel uneasy about it, or something went wrong during the shoot and they're hoping for the music to fix it. Especially in those areas, you have to be prepared to provide multiple versions and wear different musical hats and find different solutions and throw everything you can at it, either to prove the point that it cannot be fixed with music, or to hopefully find something that does work and does help it along a little bit.
Yeah, it's a big responsibility because if the scene is already not working and you are doing your best, you are giving different solutions, but even a good scene, a perfect scene, if you don't make it fine with the music, you can totally crash. I mean, I don't see any other member of the team that have this kind of power. I mean, maybe the camera can be not in the best angle or something like this, but if music works fine, everything can be more or less fine. But if the music is not, it's like I don't know how to say. It's like something that is in your eye before you arrive to the movie. I mean, if the music is if you have like a empty corridor, and music is like scary, you will be scared. If it is like happy or something, it sets your mood. You can't fight against that. Then and that leads me to a point that I want, because I see you are a fan of horror. And I'm too, but you mentioned the Hellraiser movie, Christopher Young, mm-hmm. and something I really like. I was talking about this with Eduardo and Ruben. I really like about Christopher Young that he knows how to make music for these scary worlds, but without being cheap tricks, without the scary jump and this with the water phone and all this kind of thing. I feel the sound design should be kind of a helper to set the mood, but not the mood itself. And that leads to what you say, that you should be able to provide different solutions. Then some composers, when they see an action scene, and okay, I will have an ostinato here going with the strings, and I will put some percussion and some brass making accents. They do that because that's the solution they see. But a young composer, if in all the movies he is watching is the same solution over and over, then he learned to do that. But now you are the director, and listen, this is the scene with the ostinato. Say, no, I don't like ostinatos. Try other thing. They will be like, oh, what I do? No, this is important to have resources, and yes. And again, I feel it's really important that the level, the deep level you should have when you make additional music and when you study scores from others to can help them, I believe is advantage. It gives you a better position to learn and to have more resources.
Right. And you always have to be in tune with your director, whoever is in charge. Sometimes it's not the director, sometimes directors leave after principal photography, and an editor may be in charge, or a producer may be in charge, or somebody's friend may be in charge. You don't know, but whoever that is, you have to be in tune with them, whoever is in charge of post-production and music, and to figure out what it is that they want to do, what direction, what approach they want to take with the music. You mentioned this interesting example of having a chase scene and doing a string ostinato kind of thing. I was reminded when you mentioned that of a story that Trent Reznor mentioned in an interview, and I think it was at a screening, so I don't think it's researchable online, but it was at a screening that I just attended. I think it was through the SCL, Society of Composers and Lyricists, where he was talking about the girl with the dragon tattoo. Near the end of it, there's a chase sequence. And the original approach for the music was to do a slow piece, something that tells the audience something bad is going to happen really soon. This is like a dreadful kind of thing. That's tension, dreadful, bad things happen. However, I don't know who it was, if it was a director or a studio or somebody didn't like that approach, and they had to rewrite it and do something more upbeat, more of a typical chase kind of music. Of course, when they work on a chase, it can never sound like a typical chase, but still it had to be more like that than they were originally comfortable with. But they had to do it. They had no choice. And this is also something else that I learned working with Paul Haslinger. A very important lesson is that when you receive a note from a director or producer, and it's completely contrary to what you want, or you know that if you take that note literally and give them exactly what you want, it's going to be terrible. Don't just do it, because that negative attitude will show. It will show through your work. Your work will suffer as a result from it. And you won't be happy, the client won't be happy. You may have proven the point that approach doesn't work, but then you still have to come up with something better. So instead of doing that, you have to internalize what it is that they want and find something about that approach that gets you excited. Because likewise, with excitement, it will translate through your work. If there's something in there that you can truly get excited about, chances are much higher that the client will too.
Totally right.
So that was a very important lesson to learn. If you get a note, don't just go, okay, I'll give them whatever they want, and have that sort of attitude about it. It's not healthy for yourself or for the project.
I know. The problem is, maybe I'm thinking, because I see a lot of the problems we are putting on table, and I know they will be very interesting for the people watching this, but I feel a lot of them can be fixed if you can start. I mean, if the director is thinking on the movie, just thinking on the movie, and he can, I don't know, have a lunch with you and say, Edwin, I'm thinking on a movie that is like this, and you can provide some ideas and some soundscapes. You are there from the beginning. Then I believe the influence and of all these things, the temp tracks and the pressure and everything, it will be less. And even when you should make a decision, as you say, they are very stressed. It's maybe 2 years working hard, and now what happens now? No, it's the composer calling. He says he don't like those things at all. Go to hell! I don't want to hear anything about that. I want to finish the movie and go. Maybe they will be not in the same mood, because the stamina and the energy is not the same in the beginning of the project. When I do very, very small projects, it's very different. But for me, the 2 first weeks are the most important, because all the ideas, all the passion, all the thing, I write some ideas and paper, blah, 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 blah. I write everything. Then maybe the week when I will open Cubase and start to work, maybe you are not like, but you have all this passion already in your notebook. You have all the ideas, all this thinking, And then I believe in the beginning of the process, you can make a lot of positive things for the project. But if you are not there, you can't do it. You arrive at the end, and I'm hearing you. I understand the problems, but I'm thinking, maybe this can be solved if we are there on the beginning. It's always the same, and I don't know, maybe we should change Hollywood.
And again, we're going back to the topic of time. If time allows, if you are being hired early enough to go through that exploratory process of finding the right approach and making everybody happy, that's a very good thing. But sometimes there just isn't time. Like I remember Danny Elfman when he was hired for The Hulk, which had a previous score by Michael Dana, which was not used. I remember Danny Elfman saying that, since time was so compressed, he told Ang Lee, the director, he's like, given how short this time frame is, I will write something that you will not like. It's unavoidable. It's just, because we can't fix certain things, there's no time.
Yeah.
So we both have to live with that.
Yes.
But he made it clear from the very beginning, that under normal circumstances, of course, it would be a back and forth. There would be constant adjustments. Yeah. But under this time frame, it was simply impossible. And they understood that, and the work was done, and it ended up being a very interesting score. But this comes with experience, and it takes, of course, a certain confidence for a composer to walk in and tell the director that, and hopefully not get fired right away.
Yeah.
But it's important to understand that kind of thing. And you mentioned Christopher Young earlier. I just wanted to mention that I feel lucky that I know him a little bit, not very well, but I've had a few talks with him, and he's just a very smart composer. He and very, very dedicated to the minute details of everything. And he loves to think outside the box and to come up with just weird, crazy things that are unconventional. And I think that's what makes his writing so interesting. But since he has I don't want to say classical music background, but in certain ways, there's this foundation that he has and that he can fall back on, where things do sound cohesive. Even if they come out of left field, they make sense in context. And he's just really, really good at doing that. And I really love all his music, not only the horror music.
Yeah, of course, he's very good. You can find this like organic. I call it organic. This thing, everything flows. But I believe it's because first is first. I mean, these are the themes, these are the ambience, they are not like just now you can have everything in under your fingers. You can have virtual orchestras, you can have a lot of resources, and you can like press a key and it sounds like wow. But maybe you lose this of a composer from LA. It's not very well known, but it's a guy I like it. It's not an easy person, but I like the way he speaks. His name is Mike Berta, and he was about all these things. He was saying, okay, listen, if you are making too much sound design and too much things and blah 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 blah, just go to the piano and try to play it. If it doesn't sound good, you are not making music, you are making different things like ambience, texture, as you wish. No? And it's a very radical posture, and some people is like, what this guy is saying. But I feel that the essential, if you take Christopher Young's scores and you reduce to the essence of it, it works. It works. But if you take this big D with all brasses and blah blah blah, it sounds like, but you play it in the piano, and it's not that impressive, Then how much we depend on the sound, that's something dangerous for me, now. But I hear, especially in horror, but the things I hear from you, I hear everything. I hear melodies, development, things. Everything is okay. Okay, it's some sound design. And what about the ants? It was very. I was hearing last night, and it was crazy because the mixing, was very. It sounds fresh new for me. I mean, I don't know how to explain. Maybe you can say, Tony, this was because we use that technology or whatever. But okay, I know which kind of movie it is, but it's like, okay, the mixture of the instruments and everything was like a little bit weird but interesting. Then I said, I should ask Edwin about that.
Well, thank you for listening so carefully. Well, on Dead Ant, I wanted to keep the thematic material kind of minimal, and in some cases I wanted sort of a almost Bernard Herrmann type of approach, but it also had to be rock and roll, and it had to be in your face and sort of an aggressive mix, just because the project required it. So in that case, speaking of time, I did have the luxury of having a lot of time, because there was a very long post-production in the case of Dead Ant, because of the visual effects. There's a lot of visual effects in it. They were done on a very, very small budget, so there was a lot of goodwill from the visual effects people, and when they had other work to do that was well paid, then they couldn't work on Dead Ant, and that's how this post-production process was so long. So I would get the movie in little chunks. Actually, the very first version that I started work with had barely any visual effects in it. I think there were even none.
Mm-hmm.
The shots were all there, and I sort of knew what was going to happen, and I knew there were going to be ants, and I was sort of vaguely aware of what they were going to do. But in other cases, it was just it was a bit disorienting, and I had to ask, hey, what's going on here? I don't know. But so I was able to develop that sound world and make the client happy. And in one case, there is a piece of music that plays more like source music. It's sort of a montage sequence.
Mm-hmm.
And so the music is very exposed in the movie. It plays more like a song, if you will. And so that particular cue was very important to the director to get it right. And it was actually sitting here. And we were exploring different sounds and the way they interact with other sounds. And we were going through sound banks of buzz noises that he liked or didn't like. So you can go into these minute details, and some may argue, well, it doesn't matter anyway. Most people don't even notice. But for you as a composer, it is important to take the time, if there is time, to make the client happy. And if that means that you have to literally sit here for an hour to figure out what one thing will sound like, then that's the time you have to take.
No, it's interesting because it's okay to say, okay, hybrid score, but it's not the typical hybrid score because, as you said, it mixes different things and the way it is, and maybe it's because you had the luxury to look for this. I'm writing now a score for a novel of a friend of mine. He wrote a novel, he published, and the first thing I did is, okay, in the world of the movie, of the book, they don't have technology or anything. Then I was looking for sounds. It's a little bit steampunk, then I was looking for sounds of steam and sand and to choose the palette. Okay, before painting, choose the palette. Then if you have time to do that, because I should finish because I should start to write music, but if you have time, it's better. Well, and now the thing, because you are making video games too, and this is something really, really interesting for the people watching my channel. What is the kind of games you do? Do you like adaptive music, or how do you enter on video games?
It's one of the very important lessons when you work in this business is the relationships. You have to maintain relationships, or you have to at least do your best with every project. So hopefully somebody will be reminded of you in a positive way and will recommend you or will want to work with you. So a few years ago, I worked on a project called Hollywood Soloists, and they did instrumental arrangements, chamber music type arrangements of movie themes. And I worked on one adaptation of Lawrence of Arabia, Maurice Jarre, just the main theme. I did a version for a little chamber group. And another composer working with them, his name is Thomas Parrish, and we sort of sporadically kept in contact over the years, but then he remembered me 2 years ago because he had been working with a company called Unisonar, and they provide music for video games for the company Tencent. Tencent owns 4 video game studios, and 2 of those studios, Aurora and Next Studio, are their main clients. And so Thomas had been working with them, and they got more and more work, which is a good thing. But on the other hand, just 1 or 2 people, couldn't handle the work. So he remembered me. He contacted me. I initially worked on a game where there was not a lot of music required. It was called Ring of Elysium. You can find it on Steam. And it's a first-person shooter. So the way it was described initially to me was, it's not a lot of music. A lot of it lives on sound effects, and the only music we need really is for the menu, the login, when you win, when you lose, little moments like that. So I did that, and I think it went over well, or at least well enough for them to keep calling me. And so I started to get more and more involved in these types of projects. As you may know, or as your viewers probably know, in gaming, especially in online gaming, these words always expand. There are games that may have started out 3 years ago, but they look different now. They have different music, they have new levels, they have new areas to explore. So there's always a demand, even for games that are 4 years old, there's still new music being composed to keep them fresh. Sometimes, like in the case of Ring of Elysium, they decided to get rid of all my music and use different music. I think another composer was involved, and then they asked me to redo my own work, not because the first one was bad, but because just to keep it fresh, they wanted to have something completely new, and I was happy to do that. But it was unexpected, to sort of reinvent the wheel on something that had been approved already. So it's interesting, and of course, especially interesting is when you get to be in a role where you can help establish the musical vocabulary of a new game.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate to be working on a game called Iris Fall. It's spelled interestingly with an iris and a period in the middle. Iris period Fall. And that's also on Steam available. It's set. The main character is a little girl, but she lives in a sort of a dark world. The whole visual concept is very interesting. And Thomas Parrish was the composer who started work on the score. He had to go to another project, but then he asked me to join in and actually worked on the bulk of the score, working with his themes, integrating them into new applications. And there I was able to, in conjunction with a musician of the name Yoon Lee, to come up with new sounds, because the client actually was very interested in having new instruments built. So we were able to, Yoon was able to create new instruments, and we recorded them and do all kinds of interesting experiments with them. And that was, very, very satisfying. And the client ended up being very happy because they really felt that they had something original. It didn't just sound like some other game score or movie score. It sounded truly fresh to them. And it was just an overall very good experience.
Yes, of course. It sounds interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. To create sounds, to make music, to work in teamwork. I always say, two brains are working more than just one brain. It's like, it's interesting. The way what I find interesting about the music of video games is the adaptive music, because when I studied modern harmony and everything, and I was teaching in a modern school and in a private school, modern music. Then the thing is, when you're writing a thing for a movie or for a song, whatever, you have different options. You arrive to different conclusions. I can do that, or that for a movie, let's say, but you should choose one. But in video games, you can say, okay, this guy will fight with the boss. This is the theme of fighting with the boss. But wait a minute. How many life it have when enters the room? Because maybe if it is very low in life, I can make more tension in the music. I can make something different. Not just layering, but make different solutions. Or if it has a kind of super weapon, I can make it. Then what I feel it's kind of okay. Then all the ideas I put on paper when I'm traveling to the main idea, I can use them too. Then it's like I'm not wasting paper, It's like, and that started to be interesting. And I make a small project, and I was like, okay, listen, this guy's flying. I can put these strings here doing this. Then the player can know the flying guy is coming, and they say, Tony, we don't have time to do all of this. Okay, I will prepare it anyway. If you want to use it, and I give all the themes and everything. And finally, they do the straight version. But it's really funny. For me, video games are really funny. The scene here in Spain is not like in USA, of course. It's a lot of independence. It's almost no money, and it's a little bit crazy. But from the composer's perspective, I believe it's really, really interesting, because it forces you to ask yourself questions that you never ask yourself if you are making a song or making music for a movie. Then I don't know how you live it, but maybe it's okay. That's my thing.
Yeah, in my experience, or at least working with Unisonar and the two Tencent studios, the process usually starts with, it's sort of similar to movies or TV shows. You have to have a vocabulary. So they usually send references in terms of what music they think should be similar to what we end up doing in the end. And sometimes we might end up with something completely different. Like I've even the first game that I worked on, the very first references that I got sound nothing like what we ended up using in the end. But it's very interesting to go through this process and to figure out what works and what doesn't. And like very often I would get a verbal description of a piece of music that I have to write with maybe a, you know, like a still image of the environment, or maybe a still image of a character. And I get a little bit of the story, and then I have to just write a piece, and then they're like, oh, let's try that in game. And I'm thinking, oh, I didn't know there was already a version that is playable. Yeah. And then I sometimes get footage back of gameplay with my music in it, and I'm like, oh, I need to make a change here.
Okay.
And sometimes it works, and it amazes even me, because I didn't even see the the full environment or anything.
But that's
so
good.
And then as you say, you know, sometimes even ideas that, like in this case of Iris Fall, there was one piece where I started work on it, and it was originally rejected, and I had to do revisions. But then later, after I thought I was done with everything, I got the request, hey, this earlier version of this cue, we might find a different application for it. So I prepared that as well and sent it off. So this, you know, abandoned child all of a sudden found a purpose. It's kind of neat. Yeah.
Yeah, that one. If you want, we can hear it.
Yeah. So you know, I guess lately I've been working in a lot of crazy horror movies and stuff.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, I wanted to pick something that's more common, more of a theme, as opposed to just craziness. So I want to play this piece to explain a bit of the process that we went through.
Great.
So for this piece, originally I had just a verbal description of what it should be. I knew what the characters were going to look like. This was going to be a secondary theme. So the primary theme in this game, Iris Fall, was composed by Thomas Parrish. However, this theme was going to be a brand new theme, and it had to be sort of a nostalgic kind of thing, because it's about a relationship between a grandmother and her grandchild. And the grandchild, the little girl, is our main character. So I wanted it to sound somewhat, you know, it had to sound a little strange, but it had to live in that sound world, and it had to be kind of nostalgic. So then the theme repeats. I won't play the whole thing again, but I'll just play the conclusion. So again, in this case, as I said, you need to know what the client wants. And in this case, the client made it very clear that they wanted something slightly off-center, slightly weird, but still kind of pretty. So I made this weird choice that I would never make if I knew musicians were going to play it. Like if I had to notate it, I would never make this choice. But in order to make the rhythmic pattern feel weird and unpredictable, this is actually written in 7/4. I think it's 7/4 or 7/8. But it sort of feels like 3/4. And so I was able to, put the downbeats in weird places, slightly off center. None of it is quantized. All of it is just very free playing.
Yeah, very important.
Yeah, in some cases I played something and I'm like, it's too precise, and I actually moved notes away from
Yeah, interesting. That's interesting because I always say, make a take, make it as perfect as you can, but not perfect, because machines are perfect, but we are humans. Then don't quantize lines. You make one line, you make the other. And then it's interesting for me. You can't see my face now because the camera is not working, but I'm like, oh my, because I always saying that don't quantize. And about the rhythm, yes, it's something weird, but it's not. I mean, it doesn't make you feel uncomfortable. It's nice, It have this kind of quality. Yes. Then you were explaining the downbeats. You moved the downbeats there.
Yes. So as I said, this is like weirdly in 7/4, and I don't know how well you can see these, but like sometimes it would be a bit too precise. Like here, these downbeats are a bit after the actual beat. And I for the mix I always provide click, but in this case the click is completely useless. I guess the click is only important in actiony kind of stuff, or when they need to create a loop that needs to be precise. In this case, it's basically a mood piece. It's not hitting anything. It's not written to a cinematic. It's just there to set a mood. And I figured this was a chance to do something that's slightly off kilter. Feels kind of weird. Maybe I can demonstrate a different application of this cue, because what we get is, and maybe I can show this just briefly. What we get is these spreadsheets, and they have all the cues, and then there's verbal descriptions, as I mentioned, and there needed to be an application of this particular theme, but it's darker, and I don't want to tell you too much about the story, but since the whole thing is dark, it's not too much of a surprise that things get darker. And I read in the description, this is another important lesson to learn. In the description, it mentioned the words "out of tune." And I'm like, okay, I'll detune certain elements. So there's some detuned sounds in there, and it ended up being too much. So I had to reduce some of that. Also, interestingly, what I did was to add a bit to the disorientation. I used different delays, and I automated the delays. So as you're listening to the piece, the delay times get longer and shorter, which is sort of a weird change. It's subtle.
That's the effect I call too much wine. That's the effect.
Too much wine.
Too much wine. The delay is moving, Red wine. Always.
And then also, the client wanted to have control over that. So I provided not only the version where, this weird delay changes are happening, but also a completely dry version where the instruments are just playing completely dry. And also, one other interesting thing, maybe you can see in the session, I don't know how well you can see it, but there's a lot of grayed out things in the end. Let me just briefly explain about the grayed out elements, because if I remember correctly, I wrote too much music. The piece went on, and then I looked in the database and it said, it should be only 2 minutes long, and I'd written, I think, 3 minutes or 2.5. And I'm like, okay, I need to just cut things off and end them earlier. And then in some cases, they might hear something and they might like it. They might like the longer version. So it all depends, and as I said, it depends on what the needs are within the gameplay. So anyway, I don't want to play the whole thing, but just as a demonstration, you may have noticed I did things like there's different instruments playing the same melody, but in some cases I took out individual notes from some of the elements that are playing the melody. As I said, the delays are changing, just to make it a bit weirder. The early version of this was too weird, so I had to tone it down a bit. But there's a lot of fine tuning that goes into this, and I guess in terms of games, it is important, especially if it's a game that does not have a lot of sound effects. This is not a crazy first-person shooter type game. There's no explosions or anything. It's just very quiet sound, maybe some background atmospheric noise, but a lot of it has to be carried by the music. So it was very important to go into the fine details and figure things out. And also to give the client the freedom to then make changes even after you're done with the music. So as you probably know, and as your clients know, at the end of the process, you deliver stems.
Yeah.
Sometimes they may want the wet stems with all of your effects in place and all the weird delays. But they also want the dry stems so they can themselves put effects on it, or they can change the levels. And so that was part of the project. And in this case, it was particularly important to do that.
Yeah, and it is important because the music can have a role. It's not just something in the background meanwhile the sound effects are going everywhere. I like this kind of games. I like, I don't know, for example, Journey. I like the music of Journey. It's incredible. And Ori and the Blind Forest, it have a really nice music too. Then, because the other things I like we said before, talking about movies, they are impressive, but they don't really connect with you. But this kind of ambient and mood, you can go inside and stay there, and it makes you leave the game in another way. Edwin, it's a real pleasure to speak with you. I can be here I don't know how many hours, but I don't want to steal more time from you, because I know it's a Sunday and you should leave. And only one question, because I can figure out, the people will be wondering. You said before that you should take care of the relationships and everything, but how you can do all these things if you are making music, and with it all these, the dates are very tight, and you are writing music and everything, and taking care of the relationship. Maybe this is the reason that finally the composers get agent or something like this, to can focus on music, or you can manage everything, because I feel it's difficult. I mean, maybe in the start you can do. I mean, I have no problem, one project here, another project here, my classes, the courses, and it's fine. But if I start to work, I can't go to make the social network, and be, okay, yes, I will go. Of course, yes, a lunch together, great. No, you can't, because how do you manage that?
Yeah, I guess the overall headline should be time for this interview. I guess most conversations you have with other composers, you just have to manage your time, and especially with other people who are very busy, or even busier than I am. They are appreciative when you do take the time to talk to them. And personally, I feel uncomfortable with the concept of networking, like meeting people for the sole purpose of getting work.
No, of course.
I just want to meet people, and it was actually funny, because I invited somebody to lunch once, and they actually asked me, so what's your agenda? Like, what's what do you want? And I'm like, I just want to have a conversation. And I come from Austria, and the way we do things in Austria is we invite people to lunch because we want to talk to them.
Of course, it's the same here in Spain, but you are in LA now, then it's the way it is. But yeah, I understand. Yes, from friends, it's sometimes people call you, Tony, you were making music, right? Yes, of course. Listen, I have something that maybe can be, this kind of thing happens. But when we talk about that, it seems like it's part of the work. I mean, you should do it. You should be connected, and for me, it will be like more pressure. I like to talk and I like to be with people, but if I have music to do, I can't. I mean, I can't stop and go to anywhere. I need to make the music, and I don't know. Maybe I will be on the party and thinking, oh my god, how this how you manage that?
Yeah. Well, one other interesting thing mentioned earlier. You briefly mentioned agents, managers. I think there's a common misunderstanding, especially from younger composers, about exactly what it is that agents and managers do. They can help with certain things, but you still have to do a lot of the legwork.
Yeah.
Even the composers that are very established, that have agents or have had agents for a while, even they have to do the legwork and find the projects and get the projects and do the meetings, because agents can only open the doors, and you still have to step through them and give it your all and make a great appearance and great first impressions. Nobody can do that for you. And in many cases, it even is like establishing a contact, where you, the composer, will have to go in there, and you can't just rely on other people. And even the most successful composers will tell you that agents are helpful, managers are very helpful, but don't rely on other people doing the work that you should be doing.
Yeah, of course. At the end of the day, you're alone with the director. You are the one having the conversation. You are the one that should understand. I don't like people in the middle. In fact, I will be open with you, and Ruben knows that. When he told me, Tony, we know Edwin, and I said, okay, just give me the email and I will write on. No, Tony, just let me call and let me know. I don't know why. Give me the number. I will call. Because I people in the middle is like, it's not a direct contact. But I agree that they are helpful, and in a world like in the world you are in LA and stuff, it should be something that you should have or something. But well, if you have enough time to make everything, then that's good. But if not, I don't know.
And in the case of Ruben, I think it was nice to hear from him, and I've known him for quite a while now. But it's sort of funny to me because he seems to be quite humble in that he don't expect people to remember him.
Yeah,
which is a nice quality. Like, he introduced himself. Hi, I'm Ruben. I work with Asturscore, and you may remember that we worked with you and did interviews with you. And I'm like, of course I remember.
Yeah.
But it was kind of sweet for him to not expect that. But it was nice for him to make that introduction, because had it come from you, I would not have had the immediate connection with Asturscore. So it all went very well, and I thank all of you guys for making this happen.
Well, Edwin, thank you very much for the interview, and I will translate it. I will send you a link, and now I will send you an email. Well, if you want to say something to the people watching us, like last words or something like this, it's up to you.
Well, final last words for this interview. I would say, there's one screenwriting class that I took at UCLA Extension, where the teacher said something that I'm just going to pay forward to you guys, and that is, don't get daunted, don't get discouraged. She said, if you remember one thing from this class, or if you remember one thing from this interview, don't get discouraged, because there's a lot of people around you that don't want you to do what you want to do. It can be really tough. In my cases, it even came from my own home. But if you know that you will get super depressed and go into very dark places if you don't do that artistic thing that you need to do, then you should really work hard at getting it done. For your own health, for the mental health of the people around you, it's going to be better for everybody involved. It's worth going there and taking that risk. Like, for me personally, it was a big risk to come here to LA. The people usually say it's a good thing to move to LA if you already have a job. I moved here, I had nothing. I had courses at UCLA, and that was it.
Yeah.
But I took that effort, and I was able to make connections that I would have never been able to make had I stayed in Austria. So it's always worth doing that for yourself and for others.
Thank you very much for your words. It was a very nice interview, and I hope I can translate it and upload it. We'll keep you updated. Thank you so much, Edwin.
Thank you. Bye.